It's time for the Hockey Writers Grind Line, a weekly show covering everything Detroit Red Wings. Brought to you by our own iconic top line of Wings writers. Sit back and enjoy The Grind.
Welcome to the Hockey Writers Grind Line. I'm your host, Matthew Zator, and of course, always joined in by Devin Little, my line mate here. And we've got two new faces on the show this week because we're going to be talking rebuilds. And you guys have seen some of the videos that we've had on the Hockey Writers YouTube channel. You'll recognize these faces. So we got Dayton Reimer, covers the Ottawa Senators here at the Hockey Writers, and Jacob Strozyk, who covers the Buffalo Sabres. So thanks. First of all, thanks, Dayton and Jacob, for coming on the show.
Of course. Thanks for having us.
Yeah, it's going to be fun.
Yeah, it should be fun. And, thanks for coming on the show. It's great to always have new faces on the grind line. And like I say, we're going to be talking rebuilds. Before we get to that, let's do our normal one good, one bad from the week that was. And Dayton, Jacob, it doesn't have to be Red Wings related. It can be anything hockey, whatever you want. And so we'll start with Dayton here. What's a good and a bad from the past week?
Okay. Man, I wasn't. I think this week has been mostly good. I like that. I'm going to stick with my roots here. Senators beat the Kraken 5-4, kept in the wild card race. That's pretty good. Is there bad?
Sounds like you got two goods there.
Yeah, really.
There's no bads.
Yeah, maybe. There's not a bad that's jumping out at me. It's been a pretty good week for the Senators. So,
well, there you go. It's always good to not have a bad. So there you go. Jacob, do you have a good and a bad from the past week here?
Yeah. As far as good goes, the Sabres keep scoring and they're still getting production out of their best players, but it was nice to see Jordan Greenway finally put in his first as a Sabre. It was a really cool goal to watch. But on the topic of bad comes from the same game. He may have scored his first goal, but we also got annihilated 10-4 by the Stars. So that wasn't fun to watch on the second part of that. And with that loss, we just keep dropping further and further out of the playoff race, and it's getting frustrating.
Well, there's a good and a bad in one game, so there you go. You can put it into one package there.
Yep.
All right, and finishing off with you, Devin, you got a good and a bad from the past week.
Yeah, I'm gonna go. My good is that you can kind of see it. I finally got my reverse retro on. I got it a couple days ago. Looking good, feeling great. To rewind to like 20 episodes ago when these first dropped and we were discussing them, I remember saying that I felt like I would look good in this one. I feel like I look pretty good in this. So confirmed. Good job, Adidas. Second is the one bad. I'm actually gonna say it's good and bad. It's kind of a lukewarm thing here, or a bittersweet thing. They beat the Blackhawks, which is good, and they should beat the Blackhawks because they're one of the worst teams in the league. But if you're on team tank for Bedard, which now that the Red Wings have sold off some of their pieces, a lot of people are, beating the Blackhawks hurts them in that situation. You kind of would have liked to see Chicago take the 2 points. But I know me, I'm a Michigan boy. I love when Detroit teams beat Chicago teams. So I'm not too upset about it. And I got a nice jersey. So like Dayton, I think it's actually been a pretty good week over here.
Now that you mentioned the Blackhawks, though, I think the Senators did lose to the Blackhawks, which
There you go.
There you go. There's your bad.
Block that out of my memory. So
you got
to bringing that up again.
Just reliving trauma at this point.
Well, good and a bad for me. I mean, last week the Canucks have been winning, which is a good and a bad, like Devin said, with the tank for Bedard type thing. Canucks are on a 3-game winning streak and playing a lot better hockey, which they should have played at the beginning of the season, then they wouldn't be in this position. So that's I'll say a good and a bad. So again, I love the Canucks winning. I like seeing wins, but they're not doing it at the right time of year, and especially how they started the year. So there's a good and a bad in that. And another good, Elias Pettersson just keeps chugging along, getting points. So on, say, to another 100, or not another, his first 100-point season. So that should be fun to see eventually. All right, well, let's get to the main meat of this show, and is talking rebuilds, and spurred on by comments that Steve Yzerman said post deadline. We got both teams that he mentioned here covered. So I'm just going to do a bit of a quote if people haven't heard what it is. Quote, "I look at Ottawa and Buffalo, and in all honesty, I think they're ahead of us with their group. Now, having said that, they're probably been drafting higher and longer than we have, so I expect them to be ahead of us." So we'll start with you, Devin, because you're the one that the Red Wings GM said this. So do you agree with him that Ottawa and Buffalo are, in fact, ahead of the Red Wings? And what do you think the future of the Atlantic Division looks like? Because there's quite a few skilled teams in here that are growing.
Yeah, for sure. I think that to give you a really easy answer here, just look at how the Red Wings have fared against the Senators and the Sabres this season. The Sabres have rocked them every single time they've played against them. Tage Thompson is a beast that can't be contained by anybody on the Red Wings roster, apparently. And then just, a week ago, right before the deadline, they had those back-to-back games against the Senators, and they were outplayed, out-muscled, out everything against that team. And that was a real shame because the Red Wings were riding pretty hot. We're still looking like they were in a playoff position. And, like Yzerman said, the Senators are theoretically, at least, the Senators are at the Red Wings level. And so you would have hoped to see, a more competitive games, mm-hmm. And they just didn't. And so I think when you just kind of look at the scores and just how the results have been this season, I think it's pretty easy to reach the conclusion that, yeah, both teams are ahead of them. I think kind of broad picture here, because one season doesn't tell the whole story. I think that both teams are ahead, but I wouldn't say they're leaps and bounds ahead. I think the Red Wings are still keeping pace. They're in a very close third if it's a 3-team race between these three. But like I said, I think they're close. And I think that as all three teams, their youngest players, their prospects, continue to develop and continue to start making a difference, I think we might see some things even out, especially on Detroit's end. A lot of their best prospects are still very much prospects. But as we are here today in March 2023, I think the proof is in the pudding, and the pudding is the scores. Mm-hmm. And the scores tell you that, the Sabres and the Senators both have the Red Wings number right now, and they are deservedly ahead of them in the standings.
Mm. Yeah, for sure. I mean, you're looking at Ottawa and Buffalo, they're closer to the playoffs right now than Detroit. So at least this year. All right, over to you, Jacob. Buffalo Sabres and Ottawa Senators. Do you believe they are ahead of the Red Wings, like Yzerman has said here?
I would say both of them are, and I kind of said that towards the start of the year too. I felt like the direction that both of those teams were in was just a step ahead of where the Red Wings were. I agree they're all pretty close, and depending on how luck could have, maybe changed things throughout the year, then they could all kind of be interchanged even this year. Buffalo has the offense, but that's really all that they have going for them. They forgot how to play defense. Their goaltending is atrocious. The Senators have scoring and they have defense. Their goaltending is all right, but they've been dealing with the fact that Talbot's been out for a majority of the year. And the Red Wings, they have good defense and they have good goaltending, but it doesn't seem like their forwards can put the puck in the net like they want to sometimes. So each team kind of has a missing link for the other. Buffalo just happens to have the highest powered offense. And at the end of the day, if you score more goals than the other team, you're going to pull ahead of everybody else. And sometimes they got to score 6 and have 5 against to win that game, but it is how it is. So I would say both Ottawa and the Sabres are ahead of Detroit, but it's not by a big enough margin to make it like, oh, Detroit should be tanking for the next year or two in order to catch back up. They have the pieces. they're just got to get there. So it's going to take another year, maybe two, depending on how long it is until Casper and Edvinsson really, kind of jump up into that lineup.
For sure. I agree that they're pretty close in the three, right? It's interesting to see these teams grow, though, too, because you're looking at the big guys that are at the top and they've been there for so long. And then they're kind of pushing towards that, and hopefully in the next few years. All right. Finishing off with you, Dayton, the Ottawa Senators and the Buffalo Sabres. Do you believe they're ahead of the Red Wings in their rebuilds right now?
Yeah, I think like everyone has said so far, pretty clear that the Sabres and the Senators are ahead of the Red Wings. But even going back in the draft history, like just when they started and now where they are, it's kind of a story of almost like being unable to use management or manage assets. That's what I'm trying to say. So Senators started their rebuild in 2018 when Karlsson asks to leave. That kickstarts everything. But then in 2019, the Senators have to deal with that massive mistake of a Duchesne trade that got rid of their fourth overall pick, or at least what became the fourth overall pick. Thankfully, they managed to still get Shane Pinto and Mads Sogard out of that draft, but they could have had Bowen Byram, and that would have been very nice. And arguably would have solved some defensive issues that the Senators have had since that time, and just recently fixed with Jacob Chychrun. But Detroit had been picking for longer and higher than the Senators. The Senators were kind of stuck in that 10 to 15 range for several years, even during their massive rebuild era. The Red Wings had been top 10 for a few of those before them. Same with the Sabres. I mean, well, the Sabres, they're in their second rebuild already.
Yeah, the rebuild.
Yes. The first one wasn't great. So I think it's pretty obvious that with more time, the Sabres have had more development time, and now we're seeing Rasmus Dahlin really become a top tier defender. And you're seeing someone like Tage Thompson brought in, and he's had time to develop, and all of their core guys are showing that, hey, we're ready to perform. Same with the Senators, a little bit further behind, but not too far from the Sabres. You've got the big guys, Stützle and Tkachuk and Josh Norris and Shabbat. Those guys are hitting their prime, their stride. Red Wings just don't have their guys doing that yet. They got Larkin. Yes, he's there, but Seider and Raymond, not quite yet. They're pretty young. So again, like everyone has said, I'll reiterate, not huge differences, but clear differences.
Yeah, for sure. Devin,
I actually have two things I want to throw out real quick. One thing that I think really separates Ottawa and Buffalo from Detroit is I think both the other teams have established an identity at this point, like a really clear identity. Everyone knows the term pesky sens at this point right now. And if, Brady Tkachuk's ready to fight anybody and anybody, it seems like at any given night. That's one of the reasons why the Red Wings looked so bad against the Senators, is that the Senators were willing to play that, those mind games and be tough and whatever. And that's them being true to their identity. And then the Sabres, as has already been mentioned, they have that high octane offense, and it's only going to get better. They're set up to win games 7-6. And that's fine. If they, at the end of the day, it doesn't matter how many goals you give up as long as you score more. And so from that, at least from that perspective, maybe that's not where both teams want to be at the end of the day, but they have it right now. The Senators are tough. They will get under your skin. The Sabres do have scoring ability. They will, if you give them the opportunity, they're going to dump a lot of goals on you. The Red Wings, I think they're still finding their identity. You kind of think maybe they could lean into their defense because Seider is like a key piece there, but they're not there yet. They don't have enough good quality defensemen to play that game. You think maybe they can lean on their speed because Dylan Larkin's the captain, and they do have some good skating players on that team. But again, it's not enough. They don't have the same team speed that a team like Colorado has. So I think that the Red Wings are going to be kind of stuck behind until they're able to A, find their identity, and then B, execute on it. And then pivoting, because I realized that there was like a second part of this question that I wasn't able to address. What does the Atlantic Division look like in the future? Um, I think that's where this gets really interesting because I do think the future of the Atlantic Division is these three teams. But I also think that you can't write off Montreal. They just had the top pick. They're going to have another top 10 pick. They've got good guys like Nick Suzuki, Cole Caulfield, more in the, more and more. They're going to factor in. You can't write off the Florida Panthers yet. Their core is still pretty young. The Toronto Maple Leafs, as long as they are able to keep mostly everybody together, they're going to be a problem because Austin Matthews is still in his 20s. Mitch Marner, their main guys are all still young. The only real teams that you can kind of look at and be like, they're going to drop off eventually is Boston and Tampa Bay, and Boston more soon than Tampa Bay. But I guess what I'm saying here at the end of the day is that these three teams, Detroit, Ottawa, and Buffalo, are very much kind of on the same timeline. But it's a bit of a stretch to say that these three are going to be the ones that run this division because Toronto's still going to be a factor. Florida's still going to be a factor. You can't write off Montreal. The Atlantic Division is a bloodbath in 2023. It'll probably still be a bloodbath in 2028. It's just kind of the nature of this division right now.
I think it's going to end up being as much as what the Metro has been lately in a bunch of playoff caliber type teams. So, I think this division is going to be fun to watch, throughout as these teams get better and better. It's going to be fun. And and like you said, I think Boston's going to be the one dropping off the most. Tampa, I think, still has a few years because of how they're built. So, I mean, we'll see. It's going to be fun to see how all this kind of plays out in the next few years, right? So, all right. Well, let's get to our first off the rush segment here. And since we're talking rebuilds and how they're built, start with you, Dayton. What position do you think is the most important in a rebuild? I mean, you look at the Ottawa Senators, they got their center and Tim Stützle. Goaltending, maybe not so much. They got their defense, Thomas Chabot, I would say, and then Jacob Chychrun added on to that. What position do you think is the most important when you're looking at a rebuild?
I think it's a top number one true center. A top two defensive, like a two-way or even just like a good rushing defenseman is really important. But I think you have to start on the thing that wins you games, and that's goals. A top center will get you those, and it's someone you can build around. Tim Stützle has shown that he can do that. You can put guys around him and they play better. So yeah, that's the guy you need to have. And with Connor Bedard coming up, he's a center, right? Yeah. Okay. Just making sure I didn't have facts. He's played wing before, so I was a little confused.
He is a center. There's quite a few good centers at the top of this draft.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, there are.
It's a forward heavy draft.
That's a guy you're going to want to build around. He is a franchise cornerstone.
There you go. All right. Over to you, Jacob. What position do you think is the most important in a rebuild?
I have a slight disagreement because while I do agree that having that big, overall number one center is important, at the end of the day, top end defenders, you can't just find them out in the wild. You have to home grow them more times than not. So when you can use your high end picks to get that number one and number two defenseman on your roster, you can build out forwards. You can always find a forward in free agency. You can always develop a forward prospect a lot better and a lot faster than you can a defensive prospect. So when you can get those big key pieces on the back end first and you have them settled in and you have them ready to play in the NHL by the time they're like 23, 24, your forwards will catch up to that nice and easily. So I really believe in the philosophy of build outward when it comes to rebuilding a team. And it looks like Buffalo learned that the hard way when they tried to build it with forwards first and then just kind of filter in their defense. Now they when they started the rebuild, they really went for defensemen. They grabbed Dahlin, they grabbed Samuelson, they got power. That's their big three on defense, and they're all under 23. So it's been working so far, and it's only going to get better because now you have prime years of high-end defensemen when you can pick them early on. Detroit kind of has a similar potential with Edvinsson and Seider. So I like how they're trying to build through that way and then kind of shifting forwards later on rather than early.
There you go. All right. If you've watched Prospect Corner, you'll know what Devin's answer will be. But people who watch the grind line, Devin, what is the most important position in a rebuild?
Yeah, and I'm actually going to steal Logan's point that he made on that show, because I actually think that's the best argument you can make, especially in a short amount of time. A number one defenseman is the most important, and it's because, like Jacob said, they don't grow on trees. Number one centers don't grow on trees either, but defensemen, there's 12 forwards in the lineup. There's 6 defensemen, so you better make sure that those 6 defensemen are good. And then also, your top centerman will usually play, Connor McDavid, if he's like playing like a lot, plays like 24, 25 minutes. Cale Makar and defensemen like that, if they're playing a lot, they'll play half the game. They'll play 30 minutes. And I think that's, that goes back to like there's 6 defensemen on a team. So if you have a quality number one minute munching defenseman that can do it all, you're already set pretty good heading into the future. And maybe there's a little bit of Red Wings bias there, because I think Moritz Seider definitely projects as a number one defenseman, and there's a lot of argument about what Dylan Larkin is and isn't. But no, I think that like I said, a number one defenseman plays 30 minutes at most. A number one center plays like 24, 25. So I think just based on minutes, you can make the argument that defensemen are more important.
Well, we got a split panel. So I answered that question on Prospect Corner, and I said centerman. So I don't know. I do agree with the defense aspect, but those elite number one centers don't grow on trees. I don't believe they're ones you can just sign. You can sign in free agency, but they'll be older. They'll be like in their 30s by the time you're going to get them. You're getting these guys at, you want them in their prime. You want them at the times where, your entry-level contracts ideally are still being gone. But yeah, you need both. I mean, you do. I mean, really, you need both. But yeah, it's a really tough to figure out which one is the most important. But you can see why people aren't picking wingers, because they do grow on trees. I think there's quite a few.
There's always more wingers.
Yeah. And you can sign a Darcy Kemper to win you a Stanley Cup with a .903 save percentage. So
goalies are always weird. Like, you're never sure what you're going to get when you draft one, because they take so long to develop. And if I'm going to add about the center versus defenseman, since that's kind of what we have a debate here for, I think you can trade for a defenseman easier than you can trade for a top center. Just looking at what the Senators and, bringing another team here, the Devils have done. Chychrun was acquired for 3 draft picks. Yeah. Now, of course, that was lower than expected, but they waited, and that was what got it. Dougie Hamilton in New Jersey, John Marino, those are their top guys right now. Like, they have Hischier and Hughes. Those are the guys they need to build around. The other ones, because defensemen take so long to develop, they've went out and grabbed them later once the centers are hitting their stride. So
arguments for both. So we don't have an answer.
Sound off in the comments. Break the tie.
In the comments.
Break our tie here, because we don't have an answer. All right. Well, now we've got our first half of the show done. Now we got to pay some bills and talk about the Hockey Writers Hockeypedia. Great resource for any question you have on hockey. You want to know who owns the Red Wings right now. You want to know when they last won the Stanley Cup. You want to know where in the Ottawa Senators last in the finals. I mean, it's not that long ago. And of course, the Sabres, you all know, most people know, they haven't made the playoffs in over a decade. But you can check that out on the Hockeypedia too. It'll say it. So make sure to check out Hockeypedia or bookmark it. It's in the description below, and make sure you're checking all that out.
Thank you for making us all very sad, Matt.
I can throw a fun fact.
They're all rebuilding teams. There's not much.
I got a fun fact that connects the Sabres and Senators from the last time the Senators made the playoffs.
Oh no, what you got?
Senators starting goalie the last time they made the playoffs. Anybody remember who it is?
What?
Craig Anderson.
Craig Anderson.
Craig Anderson. Oh wow.
Now 41-year-old Craig Anderson.
Oh my goodness. I can't believe he's still playing as well as he is.
Yeah.
Dude's an absolute legend, and we love him for it.
Now it would be great if he gets the Sabres to the playoffs, and his last time was in the playoffs in Ottawa. Although he was in Washington, wasn't he? He was in the playoffs.
He didn't play though. He was rostered, but I don't think he played at all.
So he has seen playoffs. So
he was,
right.
Yeah.
All right. Well, now that's out of the way. Let's get to our second half of the show and talk about first overall picks. And this is something that only one of the teams that we're talking about has had since their rebuilds began. So Buffalo Sabres had Rasmus Dahlin, and Owen Power. So they didn't just get one; they've had two. So we'll start with you, Devin, on this one. Does that give them an advantage over Ottawa and Detroit? Because they got 2 first overall picks. Well, Red Wings have none. Do they need one to keep pace with them?
I think it's yes and no. Because you almost have to look at it circumstantially, or really look at what the players are. The Sabres got, like you said, with their 2 first overall picks, they got Rasmus Dahlin in 2018, and then in 2021 they got Owen Power, both defensemen. Until this season, probably even going back to last season, Dahlin hadn't really looked like a first overall pick. He's really starting to look like it now. Yeah. But the point is that it took 5 years for him to get there. Owen Power, fine player, really promising player, but I don't think you could look at him right now in 2023 and be like, this guy looks like a first overall pick. And that's just the nature of the position, right? Defensemen usually take longer to get to that point. So right now, you could say that yes, Dahlin is I don't know if anybody else, whether it's Detroit or Ottawa, has anything like Rasmus Dahlin on their roster. That's certainly giving them an advantage. But Owen Power is, he's got some years before we can say that. But in the meantime, it's not like Detroit and Ottawa haven't had high picks. I mean, Ottawa in 2020 alone had the 3rd and 5th overall pick, and they got Tim Stützle and Josh Sanderson for it, which are both players that they are going to be building around for the foreseeable future. I don't think that they're too upset about missing out on Alexis Lafreniere that year. And then in that same year, the Red Wings had the 4th overall pick. They got Lucas Reimer. He's still developing. He's having a little bit of a sophomore slump this year, but I think you look at him still and you think that's a player that Detroit's going to be building around for the foreseeable future. So I think that Dahlin maybe gives them an advantage, but it took time to get there. Maybe Power gives them another advantage in a few years, but again, it takes time to get there. Meanwhile, the Red Wings will continue to draft. The Senators will continue to draft. So long story short, do I think the Red Wings and the Senators need a top pick to keep pace? No, but I do think that as long as all 3 teams are still in that rebuilding sphere, they will do, at least the Senators and the Red Wings will do well to get as much talent as they can, because the Sabres have a ton of it in their pipeline, and it helps that they have guys like Dahlin and Power on their roster already to power that defense and offense, because Dahlin's a point producing machine at this point.
Yeah, it's interesting how first overall picks, you think that they would need it to go, but yeah, like you say, even high picks are going to make differences too. So yeah. All right, over to you, Dayton. Your Senators haven't had first overall picks since their rebuild began. Do they need one to keep pace with the Buffalo Sabres here?
No, definitively not. I think you need quantity over quality in some cases, and you need a really good scouting department.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So 2020, supposed to be a very deep draft. Senators load up with 3 draft picks, 3rd, 5th, and 29th, I think.
Oh, I forgot about that.
Yeah.
So yeah.
So 3rd pick, you get Stützle. Basically, you get the 3rd guy out of the 3. It was up to the Rangers and the Kings to decide who the Senators got. That's fine. But really, you don't have a choice. Those were the guys that were going up the top 3. And if you didn't take one of those, you're starting to really galaxy brain it a little bit.
Yeah.
And bigger, like that's a massive risk. You take the safe guy, and like, sure, Lafreniere and Byfield aren't doing fantastic this year, but they're going to be fine. Yeah. They're just taking a little bit longer. So you get Stützle. He's worked out great. 5th overall. You had a debate between Drysdale and Sanderson. At that point, you need a little bit more of a scouting eye, and you got to know what's coming. They take Sanderson, working out pretty good so far. They needed a two-way, more defensively minded player, and Sanderson's got a fantastic speed and hockey sense. That one I wasn't as big of a fan of when they did it, but it's worked out. Great scouting department. All the way down to 29th. Now you have to know these guys. Sure, it's still like, oh, I'll pick one of the 40 names that could be of the first round. But they went with Ridley Gregg, not the most popular pick in that era or area. His first few games have looked amazing. He fits the Senators absolutely perfectly. He's contributing to that. What was it? What did Devin say? Mentality?
Identity.
Yeah. It's been a long week. So Ridley Gregg fits into that identity perfectly. Those 3 guys are becoming massive parts of this rebuild and have helped the Senators start to leave their rebuild. First overall, if they had that, would have been great. Sure, Lafreniere or Byfield, fantastic. That wouldn't have set them over the edge. You need the quantity, and you need really smart scouts to get you there.
No, great point. I agree. I think the scout, like I've said it multiple times in Prospect Corner, the draft is one thing. It's player development after that too. And scouting is a huge part of that, knowing that you can develop these players. You have the department to do it. So yeah, great point there. All right, Jacob, finishing off with you, the team that does have 2 first overall picks in their history here. Could have had 3, but I won't bring up Connor McDavid. Even though I just did. So
Savage.
Where do you think the Sabres are ahead of the Senators and Red Wings because they've got those first overall picks under their belt there?
Well, first of all, it would have been 4 times if you were supposed to pick first in 2014. And we got Sam Reinhart instead. But we're not going to go down that conspiracy theory rabbit hole just yet. No, when it comes to first overall picks, obviously it helps. It's never a bad thing to have your first pick of the litter and be able to be like, all right, this is definitely the best player possibly available. We're just going to take that. But the way Buffalo has kind of redefined themselves and the way that Kevin Adams has kind of redone this team and his, development mentality is not so much to pick the best player, but to pick the best player for the team. He's picking the right player. He's not necessarily always picking the highest skilled player at all times. And he's shown great vision in that type of a rebuilding sense since he's taken over. So having those number 1 picks obviously is just a huge bonus because you have a player like Dahlin available at 1. You could have picked Svechnikov at 2, but what would that really have added to their team at that time? They already had the high-powered offense. They still had Jack Eichel at the time. They had a core that they kind of had set and ready to roll. So even at that point, Kevin Adams wasn't in charge, but they still picked the right player for them, which was a top-end defenseman. And Dahlin may have been stunted by the abysmal experiment that was Ralph Kruger, he who shall not be named. But he's rebounded from that. The Granato effect has really taken hold over him and so many other young players. Tage Thompson came out of nowhere because of his development with Granato after the trade. Dahlin went from one of the worst possible defensemen on any roster to an absolute stud and all-star. So taking those high-end picks and taking somebody like Owen Power, who's a little bit, newer, he's 2 years removed from his draft year now. But even so, he has that look of a potential number 1 defenseman. He still has some, shaky areas in his game, like any, second. He is technically a rookie, but he played a couple of games in his first year after college. But still he has those shaky moments, but at the end of the day, it's those players that they picked super high and early in the draft that have really made the impact in their roster. Even in the earlier years when they didn't pick at 1, they still picked Reinhardt at 2, they picked Eichel at 2, and both of those players for a while made the key impact that they were supposed to. Now, Dahlin, Power, you can throw Dylan Cousins in that mix. He wasn't a number 1 pick. He was a number 7 pick. But even by picking a player like Cousins, he wasn't the best player available at that spot, but he was the right one for them. He was that kind of player that's going to shift the identity and culture of a team from just pure skill, try and win it off of whim, to hard work, dig down, make things count. And that's just the type of player that he is. So what I like as far as comparisons between the teams, they all have the same types of pieces, despite where they've drafted. Ottawa still has Shabbat. They grabbed Sanderson. He has the chance to be a number 1 type of defenseman. They got Stützle. And it forever pains me at the fact that it was a San Jose trade, because I'm also a Sharks fan, that he's not in a Sharks uniform. So they have the right pieces that they picked for their team. Detroit has the same idea. Seider was a bit of a, I don't want to call him an off the board pick, but he wasn't necessarily the highest skilled player in that position at that time. There were other people that could have gone there, because he got picked right before Cousins did. So, but it was the right pick for Detroit at that time. It was somebody that really helped to build their future identity. And that's what matters. So I don't firmly believe in you just need the number 1 overall pick and it'll solve all your problems. You just need to have the player available that works for your organization, and you can build an absolute juggernaut.
Yeah. Well, prime example of that is the Edmonton Oilers, when they were just drafting first overall picks, so many of them. And I think they didn't pick the right players at the right times in those cases. Cause I know they picked 2 times they were picking forwards, they should have picked defensemen.
Yep.
And just because they thought, oh, this guy's the best player here, we'll take him. And once biggest one, Yakubov, didn't work out, but that was, I don't know what defenseman. I know there was a defenseman in there that they could have picked.
Ryan Murray.
Murray went.
I don't know if he would have. I mean, he hasn't really turned out to be the defenseman that everyone thought, but you never know in a different system, right? So
yeah,
he would have been better at Edmonton. I have full confidence in that. Yakupov was not the right pick there.
for sure.
There's some
I can go on a rabbit hole
out of that era too. So
I do want to throw out too. I think Ottawa specifically has been very good about this. There are ways that you can get around not getting top picks and still add high-end players. How do you do that? Well, Dayton brought up a really good example of what they recently did. They spent their picks and picked up Jacob Chikrin. And then in the offseason, they spent some picks and they picked up Alex DeBrincat.
Yeah.
These are players that are in their mid-20s. They're going to, if they stick around in Ottawa, they'll be around for another decade or so. So instead of, using these picks that were, they traded first for these players, they would have gotten some good prospects. Those prospects might have taken 2 years, 3 years, 4 years to be just an NHL player, not even a difference maker, just to be an NHL player. They went out and got Alex DeBrincat, who's one of the more skilled offensive players in the league, and Jacob Chikrin, who's one of the better young defensemen in the league. That's how you can get around not getting those top, those first overall picks. You still get difference makers, young difference makers with your draft picks, just in a different way. And to kind of put a period on this, I looked at that Chikrin trade, and I was flabbergasted that that's all it was. Not only because Arizona took 2 years to make that deal, but also because why did the Red Wings do that? That's not a bad price at the end of the day. A first and 2 seconds, and they had an extra first and 2 extra seconds. They wouldn't have even dealt their own picks. Like I said, you don't have to be reliant on draft lottery to add difference makers. You can go out and get them. You just have to be willing to pay the price. And I commend Pierre Dorian and the Ottawa Senators for being willing to do the bold thing and just go get the darn player.
Yeah, no, and I've said this too multiple times. I don't know how many different shows I've said. It's like you can trade once you have picks and you have a good core, you can trade from that to get them. I mean, you don't always have to draft them, because once you build up a core of good young players, you can say, well, we can get rid of this because, you know, we have enough. They're not going to set us back. So
foundation.
Yeah. So there you go. All right. Well, we got one more topic before we end the show here, and we're going to do a little bit of a debate type thing and give each of you a chance to defend your core of players that are in this rebuild, what you hope to be a Stanley Cup winner. So we'll start with you, Dayton. Make your case for the Ottawa Senators' current core, that why they're better than the Red Wings and the Sabres.
Okay, so in preparing for this question, I looked at the three cores and I compared them. I lined them up with sort of the position or the type of player that they were. And I picked the best guy in each category that I would want on a team that is trying to become a playoff contender, or like the best team that I could make. So if you're going with like the top kind of young star, I went with Reimer, Stützle, and Cousins. I think that's a very fair comparable. They're all about the same age. With that, I go Stützle. I think that's a pretty clear, obvious choice. I don't think I'm making any waves with that. No. And just to show that I'm being fair, I went with the top defenseman next. Seider, Chabot, Dahlin. I'd go Dahlin. He's currently the best of the three, I think. Chabot's had a couple of little defensive issues. Dahlin looks like he's going to pass a point per game. That's the guy I want. But as I start going down, looking at sort of that heart and soul of the team, you got to go to Chuck. You're looking at the young potential number one defenseman. I'm going to go with Jake Sanderson, just a hair over Owen Power. But I think right now I'd go Jake Sanderson. The guy traded and brought in another sort of defenseman. I'm going to go Chychrun. Josh Norris, I'd take over Quinn and Casper. So already that's 5 of the 7 categories that I've listed. The other one would be the surprise star. Let's call it that. Between Batherson and Thompson, I'd go Thompson. He's been incredible. Like, he doesn't come completely out of nowhere, because he was a first round pick, like top 15, I think he was. It just took him longer. Batherson was a third rounder. That one was a bit more surprising. But out of the cores, most of my team is built up of Senators. So I'm going to take the Senators core, and the 2 guys that I didn't take, I probably would have taken Senators pretty close to the ones I would have taken anyways. So I think comparingly, Senators have the best core. And that's my argument.
All right. Strong argument. All right, Jacob, defend your core of the Sabres. That's better than the Red Wings and the Senators.
Well, I'm going to start right with the forward group. When I look at the Sabres forward group, it really is just nothing but pure, unadulterated effort and offense all around. Alex Tuck is still young, and he's having one of the best years of his career, and he's going to be a part of this team even after his deal expires in like 3 or 4 years. Thompson is getting better every single game that he plays. He has, those random moments where he's still kind of learning and figuring it out. But at the end of the day, you don't score 42 goals by accident. You got to have some level of goal scoring ability to get there. And I think of the 3 teams, Thompson is the best goal scorer amongst all of the rosters. Just he has the talent, he has the finishing ability, and he has all of the right tools and size to just keep getting bigger and better and badder. And it's terrifying to think what he could be by the time he's like 28 or 29, and he's figured every part of his game and every part of his body out. And it's just ridiculous to even think of. On the defensive end, I agree that Dahlin is hands down the best out of the core group of defenders. He's physical. He's big. He knows how to play D. He's smart. He does have those random defensive lapses, but that's part of being a point-producing defenseman. You're going to step up. You're going to take chances. You're going to try and score some points. And there's always going to be that time that you leave your D partner out to dry. And he has plenty of those moments. But all in all, he still does literally everything. So amongst all of the big core young defenders, Dahlin is the one that I would just want to have on any roster. When it comes to goaltending, the Sabres don't have anything now, but if you look more towards the future end, I'm such a firm believer in prospects and what they can bring, especially the one the Sabres have in Devin Levi. He's arguably one of the best goalie prospects I've seen in the past 5 years, and just everything that he does. So what the Sabres have now isn't great, but what they have for the future is. Their prospect pool is nuts when it comes to forwards, so they only have more firepower that they're going to add up front. And the longevity that they'll have and the ability to outscore all of their opponents, they have it. When it comes to heart and soul, every single player on this team has bought into the play for each other mentality. Cousins is a future leader on this team, and you can quote me on it now. I don't care. He's going to be the captain of the team at some point, and he absolutely deserves it. He's just that type of player. Cousins is big in the locker room. Tuck means the absolute world to this team. Dahlin is the energy from the back end at all times. Power is still kind of jumping up and, figuring out his place. But once he also learns how to use his size and use his body, not just to position himself and to play, defense and to have some offensive ability, when he gains a more physical aspect to his game, I think he's going to outperform players like Sanderson and players like Edvinsson. He has that higher ceiling, in my opinion. So he's closer. And overall, the Sabres just have a rounded system and a rounded group of players that are already there. They just need to organize what they have and turn it into something successful. And I think they have the chance to do that better than the other two teams with the roster that they have and with the prospects that are going to come into the system.
Another solid argument. Now, the one that everyone cares about on this show, because it's a Detroit Red Wings YouTube show. So, Devin, give us your best case why you think the Red Wings core is better than the Sabres and the Senators.
Well, I think the exciting thing about the Red Wings core is that on some level, it's not even set in stone yet. It's not completely determined. I think that there are 3 players right now that you can certainly say are part of the core. That would be Dylan Larkin, just got locked down to that 8-year deal. Moritz Seider and Lucas Reimer. I think those 3 are for sure a core pieces. You've got your top line center, top line winger, and a top pairing, probably number 1 defenseman there. Now, when you dig deeper into the prospect pool, first and foremost, they have one of the deepest prospect pools in the entire league, with key players at literally every position. You've got Simon Edvinsson, which, as Dayton mentioned previously on the show, or earlier on the show, you've got Edvinsson on the left, you've got Seider on the right, you've got a blue line set up for the future and then some, assuming he becomes part of the core, and I do think he will be. You've got Marco Kasper coming up. So in theory, you have your 1-2 punch down the middle of Larkin and Kasper. That'll be nice. And then as you dig down, you've got your goalie of the future too, in Sebastian Cossa. Now, Cossa is obviously still very raw. Doesn't exactly look like he's going to be knocking on the NHL's door next year. But he is coming up, and he's looking a lot better in the second half of this season than he did in the first half. And I think that as he continues to play, you're seeing more and more why the Red Wings were eager to draft him in the first round in 2021. I think overall, it's hard to defend the core because, like I said, it's not exactly determined yet. I think there's still some spots that need to be claimed. But I think you have to be very excited about the future because, like I said, there's key top high-end prospects at every position. every type of prospect too. You got Carter Mazer, who I think is a top 5 prospect for this team, and he's a blend of skill and tenacity, kind of like Tyler Bertuzzi. You've got your lower end guys, you've got your Red Savages, your Liam Dower Nilsons, and you've got 2 first-round picks heading into this year. So any deficiencies you have that you may want to add to establish this core, you're going to have a real good shot to add those pieces in this year's draft. So I think that if I'm being 100% honest, and this is kind of why Yzerman made his quote that we started off with, I think right now Ottawa and Buffalo's cores are better, and that's why they are performing better. But I think that if you're looking ahead 3 years down the road or so, I think you got to be really excited about what the Red Wings are going to look like. And as long as they continue to draft well, develop well, and make some nifty moves here and there, whether it's, free agent signings or trades, I think that they're going to have a dominant core heading into the future. They're just not quite there yet. We can revisit this topic in 3 years, and we can try to make our cases for our cores again, because I have a feeling I'm going to have a much better case to make.
We'll see.
Yeah, we'll see. It's going to be interesting. As of now, I mean, my opinion is, I think right now I agree with Devin. The Red Wings aren't quite there of what we know of what their core is going to be, because they only really have 3 players as part of that core right now. And, Jacob and Dayton, you've listed, I don't know how many, you listed quite a few guys that are part of your cores that are right now. So I think as of like today, I would say I want to pick the Sabres as being the more further along, because they've got so much. It's very close. I mean, it's like a hairline. It's really tough. But I think just because I love offense, and I think the Sabres, you can win games by just scoring more goals. So, I mean, as of right now, I think their core is a lot more potent offensively. And they got their I'd say arguably 2 number 1 pair defensemen as well in the future. So, and I mean, Detroit arguably could have that too with Edvinsson, but we'll see how he develops first. All right. Well, before we end our show here, let's do our quick off the rush. And this is going to be really quick. These are going to be pretty much 1-word answers. Who's going to win the cup first out of these 3 teams? And will it be with the core that we just talked about? Dayton.
Senators.
Right?
Yes.
Devin.
I have a feeling all our viewers would boo me off of this show if I said anybody other than the Red Wings. So the Red Wings.
Right. Jacob.
I mean, obviously my homer answer is going to be Buffalo, but just my gut feeling based off of prospects, players, and development, I want to say the Senators.
All right. There we go. And for me, I'm going to say the Senators too, because I think, again, they've got guys that are going to be like, look like DeBrincat. I mean, he's in his prime. If they can figure out their goaltending, I think the Senators are pretty well off. While the Red Wings and Sabres are still kind of figuring that out, even though the Red Wings have had good goaltending this year. So
you can definitely win a cup without good goaltending.
That's true.
Yeah.
Antti Raanta has a Stanley Cup ring.
Yeah.
Antti Niemi has a Stanley Cup ring. Let's not forget that name.
Yes. Yeah. True. All right. Last question, and this would be more individualized between your 3 teams. First, Devin. Tyler Bertuzzi was just traded. Did you believe he was part of this core?
No, I did not. I know I'm going to say something that's going to sound kind of silly because Larkin's only a year younger than him, but I felt like he was just a little bit too old for this core. He plays a certain type of game that doesn't age well. And, by the time that the Red Wings were ready to compete for Stanley Cups, he was going to be not the Tyler Bertuzzi that just got traded to Boston. So for better or for worse, I just never kind of figured he'd be here, be in Detroit for the long term.
All right. Jacob, Tage Thompson, do you believe he hits 50 goals in his career, maybe even this season?
I'll put money down he hits 60. It's at one point. If he keeps doing if he keeps developing the way that he is. That shot is one of the greatest things I've seen since sliced bread.
Got a really good shot, that's for sure. All right, Dayton, finishing up with you. Tim Stützle. Does he hit 100 points in his career?
Ooh, I don't know if I would have said so a year ago, but he's looking like he might. Let's go with yes. Maybe just once, but I think he does it. I don't think offense is going to be the big thing he brings. I think he's going to be kind of like a perennial 90-point guy.
I agree.
Yes. Yeah, I think so too. And just for the record, I believe Stützle should have gone first overall in that draft, personally.
I think at this point, the Rangers would agree.
Yeah,
hindsight,
is okay. Not a first overall pick caliber.
I have a whole other opinion on Lafreniere, but we can get into that another time.
And Quentin Byfield, I mean, he may eventually become really good, but I don't think he's at that first overall pick level. I just think Stützle has just already shown it to me as being a first overall pick. So, but like I said, doesn't matter. I think Elias Pettersson should have been discussed in that first overall pick discussion when he was drafted too. So,
just a quick
the Canucks wouldn't have got him. So there you go.
Quick note on Byfield. I think he's going to be Tage Thompson 2.0.
I agree.
Yeah. You wait 2 years, that kid's going to be incredible.
Yeah. There you go. All right. We'll see if all this comes true. We'll come back to this quick little off the rush and see if any of that came true. So, all right. Well, that's another episode of the Grind Line. Thanks, Dayton. Thanks, Jacob, for joining the show. It was great to have your input on your teams that are rebuilding and join in the rebuild squad here and see who, we'll see. Like I said, like Devin said, 5 years from now, we'll see where all these teams are and how many playoff appearances they made, how many Stanley Cups they won. Who knows? We will see. But thanks to everyone for joining us on another Grind Line. Make sure checking out the Hockeypedia page. All your questions answered on hockey. And make sure checking us out on the YouTube channel. Hit subscribe, hit like, and leave us your comments below. Like, you guys are always great with leaving comments on this show. So make sure to leave in the comments why the Red Wings are ahead of the Senators and Sabres, even though Yzerman says they're not. So make your case. All right. Well, that's another episode of the Grind Line. Thanks to Dayton again. Thanks, Jacob. Thanks, Devin, for joining me again. Make sure you're checking us out on another episode of the Grind Line next week.